This is the Registered Behavior Technician course presented by Shaza Attar. The course content was created by Shaza Attar and is the property of Autism Therapy and Training, Inc. All rights are reserved. This training program is based on the Behavior Analyst Certification Board 2018 RBT Task List 2nd edition and is designed to meet the 40-hour training requirement for the RBT credential. The program is offered independent of the BACB. Remember, in each class, we will have our active listening, a quiz, and a competency assessment. Hi everyone, thank you for joining me today. Today, I want to discuss two really important procedures of ABA. One is chaining and the other is shaping. I want to discuss shaping first, then I'll get into chaining. Skinner once said, "Operant conditioning shapes behavior like a sculptor shapes a lump of clay." Operant conditioning is a method of learning that focuses on the consequence that follows the behavior. When we look at reinforcement and punishment, we look at the consequence, such as a reinforcer or punisher, that strengthens a behavior or decreases the behavior. Without a consequence-based treatment, learning may not occur. Think of a comedian as they tell jokes. People laugh following these jokes. The laughter reinforces their behavior. If they told a joke and no one laughed, chances are they wouldn't tell their jokes anymore or stop telling jokes altogether. The interaction between the behavior and environment is so powerful. So we can use the consequence to improve behaviors such as verbal behavior, motor behaviors, and so on. So what is shaping and how can we use these procedures to improve behaviors? Shaping is the process of differentially reinforcing successive approximations to a target behavior, also known as the terminal behavior. Now that's a mouthful. What does that mean? Differential reinforcement is when a reinforcer is provided for a specific quality of behavior and withheld for behaviors or responses that do not match that quality. For example, if you were teaching someone to wash dishes, suppose you wanted a spotless dish, but the person cleaning the dish left a few dirty spots on it and some smudges. For the first time washing the dish, you may reinforce them, but try to reduce the number of dirty spots and smudges and work that person towards that. The next time they wash the dish, there are no dirty spots, but a few smudges. You would reinforce that behavior. If the next time they washed the dish, but you noticed dirty spots on it, you wouldn't reinforce because you are shaping their behavior now towards smudges only. And the expectation would be that there are no dirty spots. The terminal behavior is the end product of shaping. In this case, with the dishes, the terminal behavior is a spotless dish. Successive approximations bring the learner closer and closer to the terminal behavior. Again, in the case with the dishes, I want to have the person washing the dishes get closer and closer to that spotless dish. From dirty to a few dirty spots to a few smudges to eventually the spotless dish. In our everyday work, an example would be when we want to shape a learner's vocals. Suppose the terminal goal is cookie. We would start by reinforcing k, then k-y, then eventually cookie. The successive approximations are steps to reach that terminal behavior. The differential reinforcement part is reinforcing the best production of the target. Shaping is used to teach learners new behaviors. Whether it's riding a bike, doing table work, or speaking, we want to break down the skill into smaller steps. For vocal behavior, we would reinforce specific lip movements, then mouth movements, then sounds, and finally words. Shaping is used to build play skills by reinforcing a learner's ability to touch a toy, manipulate it, and then play with it functionally. Shaping is used to build social interaction by reinforcing eye contact, greetings, and conversations. Shaping can be used to build any skill in which one behavior is reinforced while an old response behavior is no longer reinforced. So you're reinforcing one and putting the other on extinction. For example, when teaching a learner to produce sounds, first you may reinforce the spread lip movement without a sound until the learner is able to do the skill readily. The RBT would only reinforce spread lip with an E sound and no longer reinforce spread lips, and so on. Some behaviors require several successive approximations, while others may only need a few. If a systematic approach is used properly, then shaping can be very successful. However, it may be time-consuming since predetermined levels of the behavior need to be developed prior to teaching. For example, think of riding a bike. How many steps are involved? Which step comes first? This would need to be planned out prior to teaching. Similarly, when teaching vocals, we need to consider all the steps to produce a single sound. What are the lips doing? What is the mouth doing? And so on. Wolf, Risley, and Mies, 1964, used shaping to help a child's behavior in wearing eyeglasses because he was in danger of losing his eyesight. He was taught to touch the glasses first, then pick them up, put the glasses up to his face, then place the glasses on his face. This was shaped gradually until they were able to target the terminal behavior. Shaping has also been used to teach learners to tolerate new foods. We've used this approach many times with our learners. We get them to touch the new food, pick it up, bring it to their lips, and so on. Shaping can be challenging when many therapists work with a learner due to the lack of consistency. If 4 therapists are working with a learner and each therapist needs to be consistent with reinforcing the same sound, coo, for example, for cookie, we may get slight variations because not everyone hears things the exact same way. For example, we had a trainee working on the sound ba with a learner. One of our lead therapists and I sat down as we were training her and noticed that she was saying be instead of ba. So I coached her on saying ba, and she would say be. We tried practicing it several times, and she couldn't hear herself and discriminate between ba and be. So a learner may produce the sound, but getting that consistency may be challenging. So ensuring this will be crucial for success. Specific variations of the behavior must be detected and reinforced, and this needs to be practiced so that the shaping procedure is most accurate. Sometimes one therapist reinforces a slightly different variation than another therapist, which could result in slower progression. Ensuring that the team understands each level accordingly and is trained in detecting the right level of the specific successive approximation. Okay, let's do a Scrabble word. The word is codex, C-O-D-E-X. This is ancient manuscript text. Let's continue. Differential reinforcement plays an important role in shaping. Reinforcement not delivered until the specific quality of the behavior is achieved. For example, a learner says cookie as a request is now saying I want cookie. Each time the learner says I want cookie, cookie is provided. However, if the learner says cookie, the reinforcer should not be given. If we reinforce the single man cookie, then the learner will in essence get mixed signals. When they say cookie, they get cookie, or when they say I want cookie, they get cookie. Since people can get lazy with language and saying just cookie will result in cookie, then why not? We often see this with learners that can't seem to request using full sentences and switch back and forth between single words and phrases. It is most likely that these single words are still being reinforced. Shaping can be used to gradually improve the form, frequency, latency, duration, and magnitude of a behavior. For example, form or topography of the behavior can be shaped, such as throwing a ball. The person throwing the ball may not throw it hard enough or even in the right angle. Think of sports like golf or baseball. Hitting the ball just right with the club takes a lot of practice, or getting the ball into the net takes precision. We often shape our own behavior by doing it over and over until we get it just right. You can shape the frequency of a behavior. For example, number of math questions someone does. If you have a learner that doesn't work well at the table and engages in problem behaviors to escape their math work, you can build them up to the terminal goal of doing full math worksheets. The learner may do one question, then two, then three, and so on. You can shape the latency of behavior as well. Think of a learner that needs to follow instructions, but they take way too long to begin engaging in the behavior. They may begin the behavior 30 seconds after given the instructions, but you want them to do it within 8 seconds. Remember when we talked about latency in our measurement class? If a learner starts walking 30 seconds after seeing the walk signal, they'll miss the opportunity to walk and cross the road, or crossing the road at a very dangerous time. So you would need to teach your learner to cross the street immediately after seeing the walk signal and shape that behavior. You can shape the duration of a behavior. On-task behaviors are great behaviors to work on. You would set a time and work towards your terminal goal. If you want your learner to work at the table for 20 minutes and stay on task as an end goal, well, that's great. Getting to 20 minutes will need a step-by-step approach. Starting with the baseline time, let's say the learner can only work for 10 seconds. So we would start at 10 seconds and shape the on-task behavior gradually over time. You can also shape the magnitude of the behavior, such as voice volume. We have a lot of learners that are very quiet and almost whisper. By reinforcing louder and louder volumes and no longer reinforcing quiet volumes, you can shape a learner to talk at an audible level. So what are some challenges and limitations to shaping? Well, there's a lack of consistency among staff, as I mentioned earlier. Ensuring you have consistency amongst the staff will be your top priority. Otherwise, the shaping will not be successful. Misuse of shaping. Shaping the wrong behaviors. Sometimes inappropriate behaviors such as a learner shouting their commands is shaped. Imagine your learner says cookie, but you don't respond right away. They may raise their voice to get your attention and say cookie, and then you attend to them and accidentally reinforce it, which is a problem. Or even problem behaviors and dangerous behaviors can be shaped. A great example of this is when toddlers' cry gets shaped to being longer and longer at bedtime. What often happens is the toddler is put in bed and the parents leave the room. The toddler begins crying. The parents wait them out for about 10 minutes, but then they begin wondering if the toddler is okay. Maybe they need something. So they go into the room to check and see if everything is okay. The toddler is fine and stops crying. The parents leave the room again. The toddler, of course, begins crying again. But this time the parents say, "We're not going back in there," and they wait about 25 minutes. And then the parents start getting worried because the crying hasn't stopped. Maybe something is wrong. As you can see, the crying behavior is getting shaped to last longer and longer. All right, let's take a quick stretch and let's do a secret word. The secret word is balloon. B-A-L-L-O-O-N. Balloon. All right, let's continue. Pryor has 10 laws of shaping behavior. I want to walk you through them so you have an understanding of shaping as a whole. The first is to raise the criteria in increments small enough. Allow the learner to have a realistic chance of reinforcement. Train one aspect of any particular behavior at a time. Put the current level of response on a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement. When introducing a new criteria, relax the old ones. Stay ahead of your client. Don't change trainers midstream. If a shaping procedure is not eliciting progress, find another. Don't interrupt a training session. If behavior deteriorates, go back to the beginning. End each session on a high note. Suppose we are going to shape vocal behavior. I need to determine the terminal goal. Let's say it's cookie. I need to determine the successive approximations. I may start with rounded lips, then k, then ku, then ku-i, then ku-ki. I need to determine what I'm differentially reinforcing. For example, I'll start with rounded lips. Once the learner does that for 3 consecutive days, or let's say 80% of the time, I will no longer reinforce rounded lips and only reinforce k with rounded lips, and so on. If you wanted to shape a learner's mean length of utterance, so the number of words they use in a phrase, you would determine your terminal goal, which may be, may I please have some cookies, which is a 6-word phrase. We start by reinforcing cookies, then have some cookies, then may I have some cookies, and so on. If the learner went back to want some cookies, I wouldn't reinforce if they had achieved the terminal goal. With volume and pitch, we can do the same. If the learner speaks quietly, we no longer reinforce that, but only reinforce an audible volume or proper pitch. I had a learner that spoke in a high pitch all the time. We shaped his vocal pitch to lower pitch by modeling and overemphasizing a low pitch. I want iPad. It was a deep voice. We started with his man's, then shaped it into his tax, and so on. Fleece and colleagues in 1981 used shaping to increase vocal volume of 2 children. The children were required to recite a nursery rhyme in front of a voice device that lit up with higher voice volumes and dimmed down with low volume. Shaping can also be used for coming back to the table. Many learners have a difficult time coming back to the table. They'll often engage in problem behaviors. Rather than just forcing them back to the table, shaping is a great procedure to use. Call the learner to the table, then let them go immediately. Then call them back to the table and let them sit for 5 seconds and gradually increase that time. Once they're sitting for 5 to 10 seconds, then you can start introducing some demands. Let me demonstrate. Bringing them to the table and shaping that can be easier if you have a strategy in place. And so one of the things that you want to do is, if the learner is, let's say, playing with a toy, building up that pairing of the table, I think, is really important first. And we talked about that when we did pairing. And so one of the things that you can do to build that going away from the table and coming back successfully is by building it up small. So the learner might be away from the table and I say, okay, let's go play. And so they leave the table for a little bit. And now let's say I want to call them back and I say, okay, back to the table. Now, initially, they may not respond very quickly and come to the table. So what I might need to do is follow through and bring them to the table. But again, having a reinforcer at the table will really be helpful. But then what I would start doing is, okay, let's go play. We would leave. And then I would say, okay, back to the table. They come back successfully to the table. And I do this, a high probability, request. And then I say, okay, let's go play. And we leave. And then I bring them back to the table. And I say, do this. All right, let's go play. And we leave. And so I do 1 imitation, then maybe 2 imitation, and I build it up slowly until I see them coming back to the table without any issues or problems. And so that's a nice way of shaping up coming back to the table. My little guy, Andy, who was about 6 years old at the time, was engaging in a lot of problem behaviors at the school. The teachers and core resource teacher tried everything to get him to work at the table, but they didn't have any success. They called me into the school to give them some tips because he was working just fine for us at the center. Andy was playing with his sandbox and his teacher closes the sandbox lid and signs all done and told him to go back to his work. And there it was, the problem behavior we were all waiting for. He flopped to the floor, kicking and screaming. He would often begin throwing chairs and then taking off his clothes. Seeing that, I couldn't help but jump in to stop that behavior. I knew exactly what he wanted, and I knew we could be successful. He was on the floor, laying down, screaming. I jumped on the floor beside him, held his hands, and ran a count and man procedure. I'll talk about that in a later class. Once he was calm, I immediately prompted sandbox. He said sandbox, and I gave him access to it immediately. I gave him about 30 seconds with the sandbox. I also brought the sandbox about a foot away from the table. This was to decrease the distance between him and the table. Less effort, more success. Then I said, back to the table, and guided him to the table. He sat on his chair, and then I sent him off immediately, and I gradually increased that time. Within 15 minutes, he was coming and leaving the table without any issues. And then he started doing math questions. I started with one and built up. I reinforced every successive approximation until we achieved the goal we wanted. Why did this work? Well, there were many factors. One, I didn't take the reinforcer away, which allowed him to trust me in that environment. Two, I built up slowly. My expectation of him sitting at the table was not high. And lastly, I made the effort to the table less. These are all factors that made the situation more successful. Something to keep in mind when working with your learners. Don't just take things away from them and not expect problem behavior, especially when you're working with a child with more problem behaviors. Know your learner and learn how to work with them more successfully. It should never have to get into big outbursts. Chaining is another procedure of ABA. Like shaping, chaining is working on developing new behaviors. So what's the difference between the two? Chaining is a sequence of stimuli and responses that are linked together, which results in a terminal behavior. With chaining, we have a behavior chain, which is a specific response that is associated with a stimulus. For example, think of a TV screen as a stimulus. The response to a TV that is off is getting the remote control. The stimulus response chain sequence results in a terminal behavior. The terminal behavior for the TV example is watching TV. Each stimulus response sequence makes up a part of the behavior chain. Seeing the TV and getting the remote control is one part of the behavior chain. There are other stimulus response chains within the behavior chain. The remote control in hand will lead to pushing the power button on the remote. Each response produces a stimulus change that also serves as a reinforcer for that response. Getting the remote control serves as a reinforcer. That same response, getting the remote control, also acts as an SD for the next response. Having the remote control in hand is now a stimulus that will trigger the next behavior, which would be pushing the power button. Let me give you another example which may simplify things for you. Let's look at hand washing. Your SD is wash your hands. This stimulus evokes the response pumping the soap. Now, if I reinforce this behavior over time, pumping the soap will serve as a reinforcer. Now, the learner has soap on their hands. This becomes an SD for the next behavior in the chain. Turning on the tap will be the response to having soap on your hands. Turning on the tap will also serve as a reinforcer because the learner will be able to wash away the soap. The water running is a stimulus that will evoke the learner placing their hands under the water to get them wet. Having wet hands becomes a part of the next behavior in the chain. Having wet hands will evoke the behavior of getting a paper towel. So you can see how the SD is linked to the next behavior, which is linked to the next stimulus response chain. Okay, let's do a Marvel character and take a quick break from all this information. The character is Captain Marvel. I have to say, she is my ultimate favorite character. Okay, let's continue. Chaining is used to teach new behaviors by chaining the stimulus and response together. You can teach a variety of behaviors such as verbal behavior, routine situations like hand washing or getting dressed, to other complex behaviors. Any behavior that have multiple steps can be broken down into smaller steps. Sometimes the simplest behaviors for us really have many steps. We once had to teach a learner to pick up their pencil and mark on paper. The learner was having a lot of trouble with this, so we decided to break it down. So we decided to break down the behavior into smaller parts because simply copying our behavior was not helping him learn the skill. We broke it down into many smaller steps. So there are two ways of chaining behaviors. We can use a forward chain or a backward chain. Forward chaining starts the procedure with the first behavior in the sequence, then you reinforce. Once acquired, teach the second from the beginning, and so on. The RBT teacher or parent will complete all the steps following the first behavior. So you would allow the learner to engage in the first behavior, and then all the steps following that behavior are prompted. You don't want to allow the learner to make any mistakes here. Some behaviors need to be taught with the first behavior sequence because it makes more sense. For example, driving a car must be taught using a forward chain. It's important to teach a new driver how to turn the car on first, then push on the brakes, then reverse the car, in that order. A backward chain starts the procedure with the last behavior in the sequence. The focus is on teaching the last step and working your way back. Then you do the second from the last, and so on. With a backward chain, reinforcement is provided at the end of the chain when the child has completed the target step. The trainer will complete all steps of the sequence and stop at the end for the learner to complete the target behavior in that chain. For example, if you're teaching the learner to get dressed, you would prompt all the steps and allow them to complete the last step independently. Suppose you were teaching your learner to get dressed to go outside. You would prompt the learner to put their shoes on, jacket, scarf, and allow them to put their hat on independently. Now you may be thinking, well, that's a lot of major steps. Some kids can't put their jacket on. Well then, we wouldn't tackle a dressing routine like that. It all depends on the learner. If they're an early learner, you may need to just teach jacket alone, picking it up, putting it on one sleeve at a time, and maybe you teach your learner to do the flip. But with an intermediate learner, you may have them do jacket, shoes, hat, scarf sequence, and so on. Maybe an advanced learner would have more steps and putting it all together, undressing, dressing, brushing teeth, eating breakfast, and so on. Remember, a behavior chain has a series of sequences. A behavior that has many components to it, such as hand washing or dressing routines, is a behavior chain and would most often require a task analysis to break it down. Let's talk about preparing for a task analysis. What is a task analysis? What are the steps of the task analysis? Are they suitable steps for the learner? Now, we'll need to set a mastery criteria, prepare your data sheet with a proper legend. How will you prompt the learner? Verbal, gestural. Now, we need to run the task analysis. So let's get into what a task analysis is. It is when we break the behavior chain into smaller steps. To determine these steps, one can conduct the routine task and write down the steps, or watch someone else doing the task and take note of the steps. A task analysis should have a legend. For example, P for prompted and I for independent, V for verbal, or G for gestural. Determine your prompt level according to the learner. Will it be hand over hand? Will it be gestural prompts? On the probe, mark down whether the behavior was prompted or completed independently. You can give the learner 3 seconds to engage in the behavior. All the other behaviors in the chain should be completed by the trainer using a hand-over-hand method or the prompt level determined. This is to minimize errors. Determine the criterion for mastery of each behavior in the sequence. For example, when the learner independently and accurately completes the behavior 3 consecutive times, the skill is acquired. Before I get into breaking down the forward and backward chaining, let's do another Scrabble word. The word is ephod, E-P-H-O-D. This is a sleeveless garment. Remember, the word is ephod. All right, let's take a look at forward chain task analysis for writing the word car. The learner is required to do the first step, then prompt all the steps, mark the data. If the learner is unable to do the first step, mark P. If they were able to do it, then mark I. Pick up pencil using a pincer grip. After the behavior has been acquired, refer back to your mastery criterion. Start the next step, and so on. Step 1 is mastered. Start step 2. Allow the learner to complete step 1 and step 2. Then prompt all the other steps from there. Mark the data. Place tip of pencil on paper. Write the letter C. Move tip of pencil and hand slightly to the right. Write the letter A. Move tip of pencil and hand slightly to the right. Write the letter R. To demonstrate this more effectively, let me show you a video clip. In this example here, we're actually doing a writing activity. And when it comes to the prompt, you really need to pay attention to where you're sitting and how you're positioned. I find a lot of the times when therapists are prompting, they don't really pay close attention to that. So for example, with a writing activity, you can't really do it when you're across the table and sitting across from the learner. You actually have to sit beside the learner. And I would probably recommend sitting to the side where their prominent hand is, the one that they're most dominant in using. So in this case, if it was the learner is right-handed, I'm going to sit on the right side. If they're left-handed, then I'm going to sit on the left side. And the reason for this, if they're left-handed, let's say, and I was trying to prompt them, then I'm going to be leaning over the paper to try to prompt them, which is not going to look and feel very good to the learner. So you have to sit on the side and you have to pay attention to where your hand is so that the learner is gaining from the skill and they're learning what's required, but your prompt is not blocking their view. So just keep that in mind. So let's take a look. The first activity that I'm going to do is I'm going to have the learner write the word car. And so we're going to do the forward chain. So I'm going to allow the learner to engage in the first part of car, which is writing the letter C, and then I'm going to prompt the rest of the steps. And then of course, as the learner is able to do, let's say the C, then I would allow them to do the A, and then the R, and then fade myself completely. But that's how the forward chain would be. But I'm going to start off with the first one. So that's my probe. I'm going to see if my teaching from yesterday was effective, and if they're able to write the letter C on their own, and then I'll prompt the rest. Okay, here we go. So write the word car. Good job. Backward chain task analysis for drawing a square. Prompt all steps using hand over hand, and the final step, allow your learner to do it without assistance. If they do not engage in the behavior within 3 seconds, mark it as a prompted trial. If you're going to teach your learner to draw a square using a backward chain, prompt the following steps that you see, but allow the learner to do the last set of the chain independently. Start prompting by picking up the pencil all the way down to the last step, which is draw a horizontal line from left to right. So once they've mastered this skill, start teaching the second from the last, which is place pencil on the end of the vertical line on the left side, and so on. Draw a vertical line down would be the next step to teach. Place pencil on the end of the horizontal line. To better explain this, let me do a video model for you. Now let's do the backward chain. So here we're going to do a square. So I'm going to prompt all the steps except for the last line, and the learner is going to do it on their own. That's the probe. Okay, let's draw a square. Good. Very good. So now that would be that step. If I wanted to, let's say if they probed that correct today, and let's say whatever the criteria is, we were going to move forward, the next day I would do the same thing, but now I'm going to let them do the last 2 lines. So let's take a look at that. Draw a square. Good job. And that's how you do the backward chain. Sometimes you can skip steps in a chain. This is known as backward chaining with leaps. This helps by reducing training time. How would the chain be determined? Well, you can watch someone do the behavior sequence and write down the steps. You can also consult with an expert or those skilled in the behavior. For example, if you didn't know how to surf and needed to write down a task analysis for that, you could get an expert surfer to help you with that. Or you can do it yourself and write down the steps as you do it. This is an example of a task analysis sheet that you may encounter. You can indicate the task and the objective of the program and list out all the skills on the left-hand side. You can put P or I to indicate whether the learner did it or not. And you can see that the sheet is graphing itself almost automatically. If you look at all the I's, you see how by the third day he has 3 of the 5 behaviors of the chain. You want to avoid using verbal prompts during a task analysis. You want to fade yourself as quickly as possible, and verbal prompts are harder to fade. Children rely on those prompts and wait for them. Reinforce using small pieces of edible without verbally praising during a forward chain so you don't break the momentum of the task analysis. Reinforce at the end of the behavior chain. Always pair verbal praise at the end of the chain. Remember to prompt all the steps that are not targets. Don't prompt steps that have been acquired previously. Avoid going too quickly or guessing about whether or not the learner is able to do the behavior in the chain. Chaining can be used for many behaviors. Behaviors that are linked together, such as hand washing, dressing, riding a bike, and crossing the road. Chaining can also be used to teach language, such as chaining sounds to form words or words to form sentences. For example, teaching the learner to say water, want water, I want water. When using chaining to teach language, it is best to use a backward chain because it flows more naturally. For example, teaching I want water as shown previously rather than teaching I want water. This will often cause choppy sounding language, which is something we want to avoid and something that may have been associated with our old teaching practices in ABA in the past. The field has grown and we have all learned a lot. Another thing to keep in mind is unwanted behaviors. In our prompting and fading class, I talked about Mikey who would say, I want chip yeah, or no purple. This happened because he chained the incorrect response with the correct response. Therefore, it is crucial that when teaching language, you have an error correction procedure to have that break between the incorrect and the correct response. Keep this in mind. Other unwanted behaviors that can occur are chaining self-stimulatory behaviors in teaching. Imagine your learner is answering a question, which is then followed by head shaking. The head shake behavior will be a response that will be reinforced. Having clean trials and looking at what your learner is doing in that moment is crucial. This also happens when problem behaviors get chained into the sequence of learning. Again, you say clap your hands. The learner claps, then stomps his feet or kicks the table. If this is reinforced, then it becomes a part of the chain. Let me show you an example. So we've talked about chaining and shaping things, and whenever we are trying to shape behavior, we're reinforcing the new behavior that they're doing and extinguishing the old behavior, the one that we no longer want to. So for example, if the child was saying something like chip before and now they're saying I want chip, I want to reinforce the better version of the request than just chip itself. When it comes to problem behavior and things like chaining problem behavior with, let's say a task that we want them to do, or sometimes not even problem behavior, even self-stimulatory behaviors, we want to pay attention to that. And so when we're chaining unwanted behaviors such as a self-stim or problem behavior, we need to pay attention to what's happening in that moment. So suppose that we were doing a puzzle and the learner was required to simply put in the puzzle piece. So I say do the puzzle and the learner puts the puzzle piece into the puzzle. That's what I want. Now suppose the learner engaged in problem behavior and started banging the piece on the table. How do you deal with that? Do we allow the learner just to put it in or not? What do you guys think? So let's take a look at this example and how I'm going to handle the behavior. Do the puzzle. Do the puzzle. That's better. Okay, so what I want you to notice here is when they started banging the piece, so let's say they're banging it, I want to stop and get to some kind of a neutral position. So I'm going to take their hand off of that puzzle piece and I want to restate my SD and go in from there. I don't want to, if they were banging the puzzle piece, for me to go do the puzzle and do it like that, because now I'm chaining this with this, and that's not what I want to do. So I want to go back into a neutral position and have the learner then engage in the correct behavior. So how do you fix this? If problem behaviors or unwanted behaviors occur during teaching, you want to undo this and have your learner engage in a neutral behavior prior to reinforcing. Using error corrections appropriately will reduce these unwanted chains. Let me show you some examples of using error correction with a variety of possible problem behaviors in teaching situations. Or you can use a neutral behavior before reinforcing. So let's suppose that the learner is engaging in self-stimulatory behaviors, and typically the behavior that they engage in is a finger to tapping to the palm. But in this case, when they're doing the puzzle, they might take the puzzle piece and actually tap it to their palm. So how do we handle that? Let's take a look. Do the puzzle. Do the puzzle. Good, much better. So again, here what we want is for the learner to engage in the right behavior without all the other events that are happening. So them tapping or them engaging in some self-stimulatory behavior or even problem behavior. So again, the key here is to get into that neutral position, restate the SD, and then have them engage in that correct behavior. Now this would apply to even verbal self-stimulatory behaviors or anything else that they might be engaging in that you don't want it to be chained in the task that you're doing. So suppose you said to the learner, what is it? And they have to label this as tiger. But before they do that, they're engaging in some vocal stereotypies. So they typically go E, and then they're going to respond to tiger. Is that the response that we want? So let's take a look at how we could possibly correct this. What is it?
Zebra.
What's this?
A giraffe.
What's this?
Tiger.
Right. So here we have the learner saying E prior to responding to tiger. So guess what? Now this gets chained with tiger. Is that the correct response? Is that what we want? No. Let's take a look at how we could correct this. What is it?
Zebra.
What is it?
Giraffe.
Do this. Say ba.
Ba.
Say ma.
Ma.
What is it?
Giraffe.
What's this?
A tiger.
Good, much better. So again, here, I don't want to chain the E sound with the response of tiger. So I might engage in some high probability tasks that I get them to do, such as knocking, maybe some vocal repetition, to just get them out of that self-stimulatory state and then go into it. The other thing that we want to look at is how's my pace? So if you notice, I'm saying, what is it? Putting it down, what is it? And by the time I get the tiger, she's already engaging her self-stimulatory behavior. So the other thing that you can do is try to work on your speed during your trials. Now, we'll talk about this more in successful teaching procedures, but I think this is important to note when you're looking at when a learner is engaging in self-stimulatory behaviors or problem behaviors, what you can do possibly to correct the teaching environment, because that's also a very important thing. It's not always about the learner engaging in a behavior, it's what are we as therapists or instructors doing that could improve so that the teaching situation improves. But again, the key thing here is that we don't want to chain the vocal stereotypy with the correct response, because then this becomes E tiger. And that's not what we want. We want it to be tiger. Okay, so that's chaining both unwanted behaviors, whether it was problem behaviors or self-stimulatory behaviors, and how to correct it. The idea here is neutral position, restate the SD, and go from there. Give that a try and see how your learners start learning. Martin and Pear, 2003, broke a chain of excessive eating by teaching the learner to place their utensil down for 3 to 5 seconds before taking the next bite. The last item to keep in mind when you're considering the use of chaining is a limited hold, which is when a sequence of behaviors must occur within a specific amount of time. For example, 5 minutes. You may want the learner to get dressed in 5 minutes rather than 20 minutes. So the learner must respond within that time to access reinforcement. Otherwise, reinforcement would not occur. All right, so let's jump into the quiz before we end with our visual schedules and their use in ABA. Good luck. What procedure reinforces one behavior then the next behavior without withholding reinforcement on the previous behaviors? A. Chaining, B. Shaping, C. Reinforcement, or D. Terminal behavior? And the correct response is A. Chaining. The RBT is prompting all the steps during shoe tying, then letting Billy pull his laces tight. What method of teaching is she using? A. Backward chaining, B. Forward chaining, C. Shaping, or D. Reinforcement? And the correct response is A. Backward chaining. The RBT is reinforcing only when Billy says cookie please and not when he says cookie. What procedure is she using? A. Backward chaining, B. Forward chaining, C. Shaping, D. Reinforcement. And the correct response is C. Shaping. What procedure reinforces one behavior while not reinforcing a previous behavior? A. Chaining, B. Shaping, C. Reinforcement, or D. Terminal behavior? And the correct response is B. Shaping. The RBT is teaching Billy to wash his hands. She prompts the first 4 steps and allows him to complete the rest of the steps independently. What method is she using? A. Backward chaining, B. Forward chaining, C. Shaping, D. Reinforcement. And the correct response is A. Backward chaining. Well done. The RBT is teaching Billy to write his name. She allows him to do the first letter, then verbally prompts the rest of the letters in his name. What method of teaching is she using? A. Backward chaining, B. Forward chaining, C. Shaping, or D. Reinforcement? And the correct response is B. Forward chaining. Now remember, we talked about using verbal prompts when you're using a chaining procedure or anytime that you're prompting something where you want the child to be independent. So you do want to be very careful with these. However, you may have to from time to time use verbal prompts. So of course, always speak to your supervisor about this. What are the steps called in a shaping procedure? A. Behavior chain, B. Successive approximations, C. Terminal behavior, D. Differential reinforcement. And the correct response is B, successive approximations. What is the name of the end goal in shaping? A, chaining, B, shaping, C, reinforcement, or D, terminal behavior? And the correct response is D, terminal behavior. Chaining is A, reinforcing a new behavior while not reinforcing another, B, successive approximations, C, links between behaviors, D, differential reinforcement. And the correct response is C, links between behaviors. Behavior chain is a specific response that is associated with a stimulus, B, successive approximations, C, specific stimulus, D, none of the above. And the correct response is A, specific response that is associated with a stimulus. Shaping uses A, specific response that is associated with a stimulus, B, successive approximations, C, differential reinforcement, D, both B and C, E, all of the above. And the correct response is D, both B and C. A task analysis is A, specific approximations, B, breaks a skill down into smaller steps, C, differential reinforcement, D, both A and C, or E, all of the above. And the correct response is B, breaks a skill down into smaller steps. Welcome back, everyone. Let's end off today's topic with visual schedules. You're probably familiar with them. You have probably used them from time to time. So what is a visual schedule? A visual schedule is a visual representation to organize the steps and help a learner successfully remember all the steps. For example, a checklist or picture visual schedule. Some examples are checklists of the day, simple textual lists of the day, activities in order of the day. This helps the learner anticipate the next task. We had a learner that started with us several months ago. He was about 7 years old, and it was his first time in an ABA type program. He would consistently ask for his mom. We decided to use his daily schedule and point out what he was going to do next. For example, the morning routine, circle time, reading, etc. And this really helped reduce a lot of the undesirable behaviors that he was engaging in. Visual schedules can be used for complex chains such as hand washing, dressing, home routine, circle time, and other skills such as that. Here's an example of a hand washing visual schedule. It gives the learner prompts to the next step: turning water on, rubbing hands, washing hands, and so on. You can write it out like this, if the learner can read. Textual visual schedules have been used to teach learners how to play board games, writing out the rules and step-by-step of what to do. We've also used visual schedules when doing independent activity schedules. This is a great way to encourage independence. What you can do is create a checklist of the bins or folders that the learner is required to do. Once completed, to put them away, they can even check off their work, starting with one worksheet per folder, then increasing the number of worksheets. Or doing bin work and teaching the learner to work independently for 3 minutes, then 5 minutes. Let me show you how this is done in practice. Independent activity schedules are a really nice thing to implement into programming. This is great for a lot of our learners that we want to get ready for school. So, some of the requirements might be that they need to sit for 15 or 20 minutes doing something independently. And so we can start off by putting things into the learners' bins. If you were using a bin system, you might use a folder system and put worksheets in there. But if we were doing bins, it might be things like doing visual performance tasks or other things like fine motor type tasks that you put in here. And these are mastered skills that you might have, and the goal here is for them to work independently for that time, staying on task. And so you might have a protocol in place. It might be some kind of a checkmark system where every time they complete a bin, they get a check mark for it. So here, my learner might be working on shape sorter and doing a puzzle. And what they're required to do is complete the shape sorter and the puzzle within a given time. So I might say that they need to finish it within, let's say, 10 minutes, but they can't exceed 20 minutes or whatever the criteria may be. And so that's something that you want to attend to. The other thing that you want to make sure that you might have to speak to your supervisor about is if you have lots of pieces, let's say for the shape sorter, finishing it in 25 seconds may not be realistic. And so if they have, let's say, 15 shapes that they have to do, you need to look at the realistic amount of time that they are completing that task. And so they work on the shape sorter. Once they complete it, the requirement would be that they would put it back into the bin and then move on to the next one. And so you can see here the learner is doing it nicely. I'm not really engaging the learner during this time. I'm allowing them to complete the skill independently. If they do go off task, I might tap just to get them to go back on task, or depending on what the required protocol is to get them back on task here. And that's basically it when it comes to independent activity schedules. Again, you might have something visual for them to see so that they could follow that schedule. If they were doing a hand washing procedure and you wanted a visual schedule for that, that's a little different. Here, what we're looking at is an independent activity schedule, which is they're working on something that might be academic or something that they could do quietly. Again, a really good task for them to do so that they are doing things on their own without people constantly being with them. And so for school, this is a really good skill for them to have. And again, I'm not really using a lot of verbal praise. I'm not really saying anything to them. What I might do at the end of it is provide them with verbal praise. If they don't do something, if they are not doing it correctly, or if they don't do something, then I might prompt them to put it away in the bin. Good job, nice work, put it away. Good. And that would be the independent activity schedule. Again, like I said, you can have a checkmark system. So if they completed it, I might have a checkmark for each bin that they did, depending on which level they're at and what they need. Some kids are very visual and they need to see that they've completed and which one they've completed. If not, it might be something that looks like that. Shaping and chaining is used everywhere and can be used in almost any situation. If you think about it, I use both shaping and chaining in these 40 hours of training. By doing the tests and getting higher scores, your behavior is being shaped. You can't go to another topic before you pass the previous section. Each course chains the next course. You learn about one thing and then I expand on it and build on it until you've learned all about ABA and how to use it in practice. Shaping and chaining are great procedures that can be used to teach new behaviors. You can use them to teach language, daily routines, academic skills, and more. Be sure that you and your team have identified the steps accurately and are working toward the same terminal behavior. Be careful. Be careful that you don't shape or chain problem behaviors with your learners. If you have, be sure you undo this. You can shape a learner to sleep in their bed by gradually moving away from their bed and out of their room so that they can sleep independently. You can chain behaviors by clearly breaking down the steps and reinforcing performance. Using visual schedules are great. They help learners do complex behaviors such as hand washing. You can use it to outline the day for them. You can also incorporate an IAS, independent activity schedule. You can also teach independent play skills, teaching the learner to stay busy with playing by having pictures of Lego, then puzzle, then coloring. The learner would learn to stay on task and work independently. This is a big part of our training program. We want learners to become independent and not rely on their teachers, therapists, or parents. So be sure to keep that in mind. Always remember that you want to fade yourself from the learner's life. You want them to be able to do things without your assistance. And if they do, you've done an amazing job. Thank you, and I'll see you at our next class.